So I'm Melissa Brown, and I am at Dell. And Dell is a computer technology company. As far as a basic customer, you think of laptops, printers, desktops. But we also cater to enterprise customers, which are companies, for example, Rackspace, maybe Southwest Airlines, large companies that require a great deal of servers and other technology to run their company. And with that, it's not just the computer technology, but it's also the service that we provide for these companies and for the individual customers in supporting them in using the products, because no technology is perfect. There's going to be something that goes wrong. Mm-hmm. So there's also the type of support services that are included in that.
Gotcha. And so could you tell me your job title with Dell and just give me a brief description of what that entails?
I am a user experience architect, and I work in the design department for the website for Dell that is customer-facing for individuals as well as smaller enterprise or company size, so anywhere between 50 to 100, or even including somebody who just has like 4 or 5 employees and they run their business out of their home. So that part of the website is divided into the shopping experience and the support experience, and I work on the support experience. And it's kind of hard to describe what I do because it's somewhat of a new profession, and in the sense that it grew out of a need for people to have a better time when they visit any kind of website, mm-hmm. and just what informs the decisions for the design, and what informs the front-end development, and just determining what a user needs for that. So that's kind of the abstract idea of mm-hmm. how user experience comes about. Kind of the more concrete and day-to-day, I will be approached by someone who's in a part of the company that represents people who have servers. So they say our customers have lots of servers and they need something on the website in order to receive information about their particular servers, and it needs to be customized to them. So then what I would do is either ask for individual interviews or information from those specific customers that they're talking about, or find some other way to conduct research to find out exactly what those needs are, and then design for that. And what I usually do is take something that on the front end for the customer seems very simple, mm-hmm. because simply we take all this code and design and structure in the background that simplifies it. So what the user sees is very simple, but what we wind up doing to make it simple is actually quite complex.
Yeah, the process.
So I have to figure out. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, and the main goal of that is to put less burden on the user in finding things and completing tasks on the website, and puts more burden on us to figure out how to make that path clear. And that could be just as simple as the button, and it could be a little bit more than just like where the user is going to look on the page, what they're going to expect to see. So you have to take into consideration those things.
I guess the simpler it is for the client or the users, the more difficult it was for you guys.
Exactly. You have it right on the money.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Let's see. Could you give me just briefly a sense of your educational background before you arrived at before you entered the workforce, and maybe highlight specifically any courses that involved writing or communication that might be relevant to what you currently do.
Okay. Um, so most previously, I went to graduate school at the School of Information, and that's here in Austin, Texas at UT.
Mm-hmm.
And our courses weren't geared towards English or writing in particular, but it was geared towards research and analyzing research and using that research to then make real-world decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, how I think of it as pertaining to writing, is one of the main factors any writer has to consider is audience. And if the writer isn't able to conceive the audience outside of his or her head, then they're going to fail as a writer, because they can't see anything other than their own perspective. So in a very loose way, a lot of my classes made me think about that. But prior to the School of Information, I did go to graduate school for, let's see if I can remember the full description of my degree for that. English composition with a certificate in post-secondary reading. And that was more for teaching writing. And so I did take rhetoric courses. I took courses on scaffolding assignments so that students would understand what you were teaching and having them, build on what they know by making connections for them, which to me it's very, very much writing related as well, because you have to start with something that the customer user understands when they're reading something in order to get them confident that they can learn more. So I see those relationships. And then prior to that, my background in teaching, and then I had a background in editing. I'm working backwards in my timeline, so forgive me, Thomas.
No, that's fine.
So prior to the graduate program for English composition, I did work in editing using my English degree and background that I had previously in a smaller publishing company, working as an assistant editor, and then working as an editor here in Austin. And I think mainly what helped me the most from undergraduate to be a good editor wasn't necessarily the lessons I had in grammar or in rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
It was my ability to take a house guide. It's the big book you get when you start working as an editor that tells you all the grammar rules and instructions and everything and how it applies to the company's writing rules, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that I already knew these rules going in. It was that I could learn them very quickly and I could see patterns. And I think that was the main goal, was even though I didn't have previous experience in dissecting sentences and taking things apart, I still had a really good understanding on finding and identifying patterns and memorizing them and knowing when something worked and when it didn't, and having the sense enough to look it up. A lot of people don't double check things. And by the time I was concluding, when I was concluding being an editor, I was the go-to person for any kind of information like that. I mean, everybody would come and ask me rather than try to look it up. Because I had just, yes and no, had a lot of knocks all the time and interruptions. People wanted to discuss comma placement and so forth, which, you think English majors, oh, that's really exciting, but not always.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I guess when you get that role, it could get a little tedious when every person comes to you for any little thing.
Right. So, a long story short, it's just bits and pieces that I pulled up, and it's a lot more the thought process than it really was the nitty-gritty
Well,
grammar rules and rhetoric.
so yeah, so I'm interested in that kind of that distinction, from academia, how you can pull out tools, in one sense, and then you can also just pull out skills, and
Right.
it's interesting that it seems that it's the skills or the awareness of certain things that carries over more than the specific tools you use. But
Yeah.
I'll get into that in a couple of questions. If we could if we could switch to look at more of your current work. I'm going to premise. I've told you the kind of the purpose of my research, and so before I ask this question, I just want you to keep in mind that when I say writing, I really mean anything that involves creating content. So by writing, I mean anything that is visualized data, interactive data, design. Really, all of those I'm trying to encompass in that word writing.
Okay.
So just to give an idea of, or a more specific look at what you do as a user experience, could you tell me about a recent project you've been assigned, or that you've completed, or that you're currently doing, and tell me what kind of writing you do in order to complete that project?
Okay.
And you can be as non-specific as you need to be for Dell confidentiality.
Trying to think of a good example. Give me one moment. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And even if it isn't a specific project, it could be just a common task that you have to complete, and anything like that.
Okay. So one common thing that will come up is we will be asked to design something that in reality may only have one type of user, meaning say somebody who works daily with servers. And so they have a certain level of technical knowledge, but they deal mainly with servers. And we'll be asked to design it, but then we're also told, oh, this could be for anybody. So anyone could use this. You might have somebody who just has a laptop and they need to go through and set up downloading new software. So you have to keep a balance as far as what kind of information do you display, depending on the task that they're completing, when you have this very broad audience. And so I will broadly say in those kinds of instances, we think of how are we going to display content. And I will say that being on the support side of the website, we are very content heavy as far as words and text that we use, not so much as images. Images tend to be more associated with a shopping experience, whereas people come to the support website for learning, and so learning is more associated with having the copy, the text, the instructions. So whenever we are designing a task, and it could be for novice to an expert customer, we have to have a balance. So we need to be able to write something out with the basic steps that they're going to complete, but then also keep in mind the progressive disclosure of additional information, and how are we going to make sure that that novice user clicks on those or finds a way to access that information. And those things can come in odds because if you have, say, a form and you have all these hyperlinks next to input fields, how many times is the user going to actually click on those? If you have 6 or 7 on a page, you have to reevaluate, like, is this really a good form? I mean, we're having that user to click on almost every single input field to determine what the heck he or she has to enter. So, whereas the expert would know exactly what a certain serial number code would be. They know exactly where to look on their server to find that exact code. A novice would have probably no idea this might be their first Dell device even. So they don't even know what we might be labeling it, say, service tag. And this is their first Dell. They had an HP or they had a Lenovo before this. They don't know what a service tag is. So the question is, do we word that differently? Do we provide support for them to better understand it?
So yes.
That's
sorry. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's all right.
But no, it seems just to directly reflect what you're talking about with the audience awareness. You have to take into account what the audience is bringing to the table in terms of knowledge and what they're looking to leave with. That's really interesting. It seems your relationship with the content that you work with, it seems more to be in the arrangement of the content rather than the creation of the content. Is that fair to say?
That's pretty accurate. What I wind up doing is asking specific questions. Say there's a certain brand of server and they have a unique kind of number. And I didn't know that when I started the project. I have to go and ask people questions. We call them SMEs, which are experts. They are the experts in the field. So we would go and ask them, and we would make sure that we understood what we were communicating to the user, and we might be receiving that information in a very technical way. But what I would do is then take that information, kind of make it as a clearer language, and then our content strategist, she would go through wires that I create, or she would go through the prototype, see the language that I've created, and she would tweak it. She would tweak it for primarily two things. One, she'll tweak it so that it matches the Dell brand. Dell has a voice. A lot of companies do. So with that in mind, it needs to be worded in a certain way. And in that sense, the Dell brand and the Dell voice, it's a little bit more informal. It's kind of cash. So it at the same time, though, it has to convey confidence to the user. That they know what's happening, that they feel rest assured that these instructions are concise and clear, but also reassurance that what the instructions are receiving are pretty simple and easy.
Gotcha.
So she looks at it for that. She also double checks on things. So I might have something in about certain servers, going up to 2009. And she will look at that and she might say something like, well, I think actually it's actually going up to 2012. So she'll go and double check sometimes some of the information I have and maybe take something that I've written where it's 4 sentences and she's able to get it down to 2. That's the other thing, being able to simplify.
Efficiency.
Because, when I'm really close to the information and the content and the technical individual that gives us the information, sometimes it's harder for me to edit my own work.
I see.
So. And I didn't tell you. I said SME, which is SME. I'm a subject matter expert. I'm wondering if you've heard that where you're working.
I had never heard what the acronym actually stood for, but I knew it in some way related loosely to an expert. But cool.
Yeah.
Subject matter expert.
Mhm.
So it seems like everything all the content that you're working with ends up eventually, its final form is online, right? Is accessed online, and so my next question is, what kind of platforms or technologies or software do you use when you go about your projects?
Awesome question. So,
And if you could,
if
you could like try to repeat the question, I guess, in your answer, so when I take it out, it'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
The tools that I work with every day are InDesign. Actually, I would say I work with InDesign every week because our company is Microsoft heavy. We tend to use a lot of Microsoft products.
Mm-hmm.
My main tool that I use is called Visio. Visio is a conceptual design tool that we can use in order to display wires for developing our screens. So we have web pages, right, and we can show those within Visio. We create different views within Visio using shapes and design tools like that. And in my previous job, we used something called Axure, and I loved Axure for a lot of reasons. One reason was I could not just create like a visual layout, but I could also work the interactions, meaning I make clickable, which you can do in an extent in InDesign. But just being able to have the ability to make things clickable also helps in clarifying UI specs. And UI specifications are used to communicate to devs what each element on the page is supposed to do. So button on click, that button will navigate to this page. So for creating those kinds of UI specs, we've used both Visio, we just build that in, or we use InDesign for that. Other tools we use Word documents, we use Excel spreadsheets. Excel spreadsheets are important when you are trying to communicate a lot of copy to a dev team and they're using CMS keys. I don't want to go into great detail over what that is. But basically, when you're sending information in a prototype to a development team, they care more about the interactions because when we develop prototypes, we use Bootstrap. We have our own form of Bootstrap that we use. So they're paying more attention to that than they are the actual copy that we build into the page. And with that in mind, they'll sometimes just copy and paste it right out of the prototype, or they'll try to type it, and errors will occur. So what we try to do is we try to send a spreadsheet and match up CMS keys with the content and where it should appear on the page, just to make that process a lot easier. Should I clarify what a CMS key is?
I don't think it'll be necessary. Okay. I think you've provided enough of the tools.
Okay.
But I'll
I guess the important thing to keep in mind is that when we're working with tools, it's not just that we're working in tools in order to discuss them with each other, like what we're designing and doing. It's to communicate to other groups. And so we need to make sure that if we're sending something, we can send wires in a PowerPoint. That's fine. But whatever we write into that PowerPoint for something simple, it needs to be communicated clearly. So we need to understand how to use that tool, and then not only that, but when it goes to somebody else and they open that tool, are they going to open it as a PDF or are they going to open it as a PowerPoint, right? So knowing not just how to use the tool, but how the other person's going to be using that tool is really important. Yeah.
Especially on the collaboration end, because it's like it's a back and forth thing, I guess.
Right.
So that's awesome. That's a great list of technologies. Let's see. I'm looking for.
Oh, and just real quickly, we internally on our team we do use red lines. We'll print up pages and just write on the pages. We'll use editorial marks and whatnot. Not everybody on my team knows editorial marks. I just have the background in editing, so I try to make it really clear. But that's also something that's helpful.
That's interesting, and that's a nice segue into my next question, which is it might be a little vague, so forgive me, but see what you can do with it. Something like these editing marks finding their way into Dell, which is just thought of generally as just it's a tech it's a technology company, and it's just when you think of the type of work that goes on at Dell, the first thing that comes to your mind is definitely not editing marks. It's software engineering, it's all of that. So my question to you is, could you talk a little bit about the kind of the humanities role, I guess, within tech companies? Does that make sense?
So when I think of humanities role, I either think of it in the academic sense as kind of the idea of Dell being a global company, and so when we think of who's using it, we need to think globally. We shouldn't just think about the U.S. Is that what you mean? Like the understanding that there's different experiences out there, and
well, that's definitely part of it. I guess what I'm really getting at is how do you see people from a humanities background such as your own, with the English undergraduate and the editing experience, the role that people like you and your user experience group play in tech companies?
I would say two things. One is I was always pushed to think critically. Having a humanities background, always taught to think critically, meaning ask questions, find information, make informed decisions. Mm-hmm. And I find not necessarily the people who don't have humanities background, but when you're in technology, you work with a lot of people who have more of a business focus or more of a focus in on there's no time in between a project starting and it needs to be delivered. Like they don't think about that time in between being used to think. So there'll be meetings where I go to and they immediately will want an answer to a problem, and mm-hmm. It's like, well, I need to think about it. And one thing that having humanities background didn't really prepare me for was just how mad people will get if you don't give them an answer immediately. People can get really, really mad, and they can call you names or accuse you of things like you just want to hold up the process or you're just causing problems, you know?
Yeah.
And it's, it's tough because, being in a humanities background, you're used to having discussions and debates, but you're not used to people really getting mad or upset at you. I mean, at least I didn't. I was very much used to a discussion, thinking critically and so forth. So that was different. So is that more on the lines of what you're thinking when you're thinking of humanities?
Exactly.
Okay.
Um,
One other thing I will tack on to that as well, and I know as an undergrad I hated it. I hated this so much, but was working on group projects.
mhm.
Group projects are horrible when you're an undergrad. Like, you hate it so much because there's always a dud, right? There's always the bossy person who just thinks y'all are going to screw it all up, so they don't want you to do anything. There's all these different characters.
Of course.
And, unfortunately, that's going to be your life for the rest of your life if you have a job and you work with other people. So the key in undergrad is not to just, be very zen about it, but to realize you have to develop strategies. And you have to realize that's another person, too. That person's not necessarily out to get you, It's just you have to learn to work with people like that. And sometimes people don't realize that they're being the bossy one, or they don't realize, they don't realize they're being the dud, So a lot of it, too, is just those kinds of experiences. You can either balk at them and complain about them all you like, or you can embrace it and just say, you know what, this is the best opportunity I'm ever going to have at first-hand experience in a humanities degree.
I'm in a group project right now, and you're making me reconsider my role. Hopefully I'm not the dud.
One thing I will say, it's a cultural thing for, I think, a lot of private universities, is we're so non-confrontational.
Mhm.
Like, we don't speak up. And the second time in grad school when I was working with people, I was the one who was like, okay, guys, we need to talk about this dud over here, while the dud was sitting right there. Like, just saying, like, you're not doing a lot of the work, so-and-so's doing more work, and then that person will say, oh, I didn't realize, I thought so-and-so wanted to do the work. They were kind of pushing me out. When you open that dialogue, you start to realize, once again, people aren't just stereotypes. You can't just pigeonhole them. There's much more complexity to it.
Absolutely. I think I only have 2 more questions. I have many more questions, but for the sake of your time, I can condense it down into 2 kind of overarching final ones.
Okay.
So I've got a good sense of the projects you work on and the tools you use to accomplish those. So there's a fair amount of knowledge that is required on your end to accomplish those tasks. And then I want to explore the gap between the knowledge you got as in graduate school and across your academic experience. So the knowledge you received there. Sorry, this is let me start over. Let's see. So for what you learned throughout your academic career, and what you currently do, how big was that gap in knowledge, in skills and knowledge
I lost
and ability?
you, Thomas.
Can you hear me?
Hey, can you hear me? I think I'm losing you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Now I can.
Yeah?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think I lost you for just a little bit, and I apologize because you were explaining your question, and I missed most of that.
Okay. No, it's fine. I'm going to try again because I'm going to try to phrase it better.
Okay.
Okay. So, could you talk a little bit about how you bridged the gap of knowledge between the skills and tools you used during your academic career and the skills and tools that were required of you when you started your current job at Dell?
So I always think it's important to rationalize the money you spend on school. Because the point is to be marketable and to go into the workforce. And I admit that a good chunk of why it was an easy transition for me was because of the internship. And I'm not going to say it had nothing to do with the classroom. The reason why I say it has to do with internships is because I would be in my human-computer interaction class on Monday, and we'd learn about something. And then on Tuesday, I would go into my internship, and my manager would say, hey, I need you to do blank. And I would thank the heavens that the day before we had learned how to do that in class.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a lot of questions. I just always looked like I knew what I was doing.
Uh-huh.
Because I had such a good concrete experience in my classroom, meaning it wasn't just all theory and philosophical debates. It was, here are the ideas and the concepts, and then here is how you apply them in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So having that in the classroom and then also having that additionally in my internships really helped. But if I did not have the discussions, the philosophical discussions, the concepts, the rational thoughts
Mm-hmm.
that went into the decisions you have to make, then you can't reproduce those decisions on your own.
Yeah,
right?
you need both sides.
Right, you really do need a balance, because it's not like I'm taking a nail and I'm hammering it into a board, and I just need to keep practicing that. It's so much more than just that physical experience. Like, it's every time something different happens, it's not going to be the exact same nail every single time. It's never going to be the exact same board. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have that background, the abstract, the thought process that goes into discussions that we had over certain topics and the way you think things through, you can only get so far. Like, you just wind up designing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
Content here, button here. Next one. Copy here, button here. You just do the same thing, and that's not going to help anybody.
Yeah, the demands are more dynamic, I guess. You gotta, there's just more to account for, I guess.
Yeah, very well put.
Okay, that's an awesome answer. That's really helpful. Let's see. I'm going to ask you a final question. Hold on one second. I guess for the last one, well, you've kind of already covered that. You've covered so much. Let's see.
I'm very talky.
That's helpful for me. Do you? Let's see. So I gave you my kind of broad definition of writing, which is just anything creating content. Regardless of form.
Story.
Yeah.
You think of the story, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So could you describe yourself, with your role as a user experience, would you describe yourself as a writer or as a designer, or what, how would you kind of characterize your role?
So you cut out a little bit, but I did hear your question. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
So there is more to writing than what you put on the page. As I'm sure you know, you go through all these stages: the outline, the pre-writing, the researching. All of that goes into good writing. So in that sense, I think of myself as contributing to a clear story. When we receive requests for building something on the website, or designing something on the website, we receive requests in as sentences that are called user stories. And sometimes these user stories aren't exactly what we think of as user stories in user experience. Sometimes they're written like this. They'll say, I, as a server, would like to have my internal BIOS displayed on the website. It's like, no, that's not a user story. The user story is from the perspective of the customer, who is saying, I, as a customer, need to see the information about my server displayed on the website because it has crashed, and so I need to see the information so I can look up the error and fix it. So I, in that sense, I take these user stories and I have to make sure they're written correctly for me. I can't have them, the people requesting them, I can't give them instructions on how to write those better. I have to go take that, what they wrote, I have to interpret it, and I have to translate that. And that's something we commonly say is, how is that going to translate? How is that going to look on the page? How is this going to go from abstract thought or idea into something that the user can see and interact with and understand why and what they're doing? And so part of that is understanding the user needs, being able to, in a sense, write a story within the page of how they're thinking, what they expect to see next, what they want to do next, and how they're going to feel during doing that. And I think more and more user experience is being valued because we understand that our customers have feelings. And after they've clicked 2 or 3 times and they don't hit a milestone, nothing is achieved, how are they going to feel at that point? Well, they're going to feel like they're making no progress. And a lot of times they're going to feel as though they are failing. We don't want our customers to feel like they're failing. That makes them feel bad. Mm-hmm. We don't want them to leave with that feeling. So when I think of that, as far as what a writer does, a writer has to think about how they're taking that customer on that journey and what they're going through, and what they expect. And if you're writing a fun romantic book, you have to think, well, they're going to want to have romance, right? They're going to want to have something come along that impedes the relationship, and then, lo and behold, they're together in the end and it's happy, right? Yeah. So knowing, going back to that issue of what is your audience expecting, and writing towards that and designing towards that, I think they're very much in mind. And we also discuss issues of storyboards. Do you know what a storyboard is?
Maybe not in the context of what you do. Could you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, when we're thinking about a design, we discuss, sometimes we'll just discuss this while we're talking, and sometimes you can draw this out. You draw the person and how they're interacting with your product. So you draw Sally, and she's picking up her printer, and she realizes that she doesn't know how to set up her printer. She's unboxed it. So we have a picture of Sally, and she's unboxing her printer, and she doesn't know what to do next. You plug it in the wall. Is it supposed to work? So, and by doing that and creating those stories, we make it more real. We make the people who use it more real. Because you're thinking through not just what they're doing on the website, but you're thinking about their whole user journey, from ordering it to opening the box to what they have in the box, and how that's going to help them get to that point where they can, use the device and use it correctly.
From that perspective,
so it's not necessarily how.
Sorry, go on. You can go.
Sorry, that didn't quite answer your question in a sense, because that's more of how we work internally. It's not necessarily how that shows to the customer on the website.
No, but that's fine. That gives a really good look into it. It's interesting because you're as much an architect of experience as as a writer. You're designing this.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, the idea of somebody who's doing user experience, it's usually it grows out of a need, right? So sometimes a user experience, like I'm a user experience architect, and other user experience architects have come from backgrounds of they were a front end developer, and they just got really good at thinking about what their customer needs, and so they became a UX architect. Another person might be a designer who has a really strong background in fine arts. You can come from a lot of different backgrounds and be in user experience.
Yeah, I imagine so. That's good to hear. Okay, this will be the last question, I promise, but I need to ask it.
Oh, it's fine.
What skills you've talked a bit about the skills that are most necessary, coming that you've pulled from your academic career into the work, critical thinking and audience awareness. Could you just briefly list some of those skills that you feel are most important to starting as a user experience architect? Yeah, does that make sense?
I'm sorry, which skills?
Well, I guess what tools or skills would you like to see people entering your field possessing? Or do you think they need to possess to be successful in your field?
Sure. People skills. That's really important.
Yeah.
I work with a variety of personalities, and every profession tends to have certain types of personalities, right? I mean, you've worked with people who are in marketing. People who are in marketing are very different from people who are working in who work coding all day,
Mm-hmm.
And so just keeping in mind that you have to have good people skills, regardless of the people you're interacting with. You can't be really good at communicating with one group of people and then not be good with another group. So like this morning, I had a phone call at 7 a.m. with 10 web developers who are in India, which is why we have early morning meetings. And then it's kind of like the manager who's here in the United States. And so when you're having those kinds of meetings, you have to listen and understand, is the manager talking to his dev team, and this is the conversation that does not involve you?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a conversation that you need to jump in on and make sure that you understand it? And part of that is knowing that they have their own dynamic and how they talk and how they communicate. And then here I am, and how do I jump into that? How do I talk to them? How do I make sure I'm not being rude? And how do I make sure that my voice is heard and that I can stand my ground, even though I don't really work with them every day, but I might wind up arguing with them. And, you know, different groups have different ways of interacting. Like, I've worked with one group where somebody on the team yelled at me all the time. Like, and I just brushed it off as, hey, his probably everyday speaking voice is yelling.
Uh-huh.
Like, he just must sound mad all the time. And so I convinced myself of that for like a month. And I know that that wasn't true ultimately. He was just mad all the time. But, you know, when you do that, you can handle things a lot more calmly. You're like, oh, this guy has just probably got vocal issues, and so he has to yell all the time. You know?
Yeah.
So you just, you know, you have to deal with that and also realize, you know, like this is these are people, and you gotta work with them. You gotta communicate well with them without, you know, making them as mad as they're making you.
It's funny because I mean you're in the tech world, but it seems like your main product that you're dealing with is people, you know, and tech is just kind of the you know, the means of the relationship. But yeah, it's just people are your products that you're working with.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I know it's kind of my soapbox. I always get on my soapbox about like how important it is when you're working with, because you are working with people, no matter where you are, whatever job you have, whatever you work on, it's going to be used by people. So in my school, I had classmates who were going into the archives field, and I had some of them tell me like, I'm doing this because I don't like people that much, and I just want to be in a room somewhere working with histories or old books, and I would just say like, but why are you working with those things? You know, who pays for your job, and are there people that are going to want to come in and look at those, and so you have to archive them in a way so those people can find them, you know, and enjoy them the way you're enjoying them. And they just, you know, like it didn't click. It just didn't click. You know, they didn't think about like, oh, actually, I guess I am indirectly interacting with people. So, and then there was a second part to your question.
Well, I would just I guess how about tools? Any specific and by tools I mean like technological abilities.
Yes. Okay. So I know Keely and I talked about this when we came and talked to your class. But for the sake of just the future of the world, all people should be learning how to do basic coding. Always. Like, just learn it. Have you taken any kind of classes in HTML or CSS? Learn on the side?
That is kind of my that's kind of my main push for this paper or for this research is
it's a language. It's a language, and you have to learn that language. You know, and when you do, it makes things so much easier because you understand. So, like, I'll have a developer say, well, we can't do this because of blank. And I'll say, no, I know you can do some JavaScript and just have that on the page, and it will take you 20 minutes to write that. And just the look on their face, because, oh, no, you're not supposed to see behind the curtain, right? You're not supposed to know these things. It's an empowerment issue. If you don't have that, you don't feel empowered in the decisions that you're making. So just having that and understanding how CMS works, how, you know, the content management system, it works. I mean, a content management system is just a website. But just when people say it, it sounds intimidating. But it's, you know, Facebook is a content management system.
Yeah.
Right? A PowerPoint deck. I'm sorry, a PowerPoint slide. You know, that's a content management system.
Yeah.
Like we need to have the language of technology just not feel so distant.
So foreign, yeah.
So yeah, definitely advocate learning. If not learning directly how to code, but at least understanding how it works.
Yeah.
You know?
I completely agree, and I'm really glad. Yeah, you said that explicitly. It's behind everything we do now. You know, it's behind every service, every tool we use, and it's crazy that we just are not emphasized to even, you know, explore becoming fluent in that language. You know,
and for me, like I'm older than you, and the fact that I could learn it. I mean, I'm not like crazy old, but I mean, I'm just saying that I'm old enough that I'm in that generation where when I was in college, it was still just, we were just still kind of learning what the internet is and what it can do and how it impacts people. Like we were, at the beginning parts of that. And, it was a mystery as to what coding was.
Uh-huh.
And I still learned it. And when you learn it, it doesn't feel as weird or foreign or difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem is because you don't understand it, you just ignore it.